I did not know my childhood was blessed while I was living it. Children rarely do. A child does not wake in a warm bed and think, "How fortunate I am that the ceiling has never cracked from artillery." A child does not sit at breakfast and silently thank history for both parents and grandparents. A roof that does not shake, a pantry that does not empty, a street where soldiers do not march past the windows. A child thinks about what she lacks. I was no different. The world had already been at war for 30 years when I was born, and it would not stop until I was 17. I knew the names adults lowered their voices around: the tyrant, Bathory, the ruler of heroes. I knew Zhonghui, Archimedes, and the Sunset Republic from maps, newspapers, and the tense pauses that came before adults changed subjects. I knew there were places where children learned the sounds of bombers before lullabies. But I grew up in Haven. Swamp City was not soft. It sweated, it sank at the edges. Summer turned the canals green and metallic. Winter damp crept through wool and settled in the joints. The streets smelled of brackish water, frying oil, engine smoke, and canal disinfectant. Mosquitoes lifted in silver clouds at dusk. Moss grew between expensive stones and cheap brick alike. But Haven was safe. Safe enough. And I had the Helsing Institute. The old Helsing Lodge in Flavem had been annihilated during the Gothic advance in 2667. I grew up with that sentence the way other children grew up with nursery rhymes. The old lodge was annihilated. Adults said it plainly, too plainly, as though every sharp edge had been worn off by repetition. But Flavem lived in our house anyway. Smoke dark portraits in the hallway, my grandfather's maps sealed behind glass, my grandmother's surgical tools wrapped in oilcloth and locked in a cabinet I was not supposed to touch, a dented silver bullet displayed beside a blackened strip of armor, a warding bell with a crack through its throat so old no one alive had ever heard it ring. My grandparents were among the few who escaped Flavem before the advance. They arrived in Vespucci with books, weapons, credentials, debts, wounds, and a family name that meant too much in Europa and not enough here. They had to find their place. That was how my grandfather said it. Finding our place. He made it sound dignified. My grandmother made it sound like surviving. The first Vespuccian Helsing Institute met in a rented pub on JRT's campus. I loved that story as a child. I imagined apprentices leaning over beer-stained tables, while my grandfather lectured on esoteric precedent beside a cracked dartboard. In my mind, the whole place smelled romantic. Candle wax, chalk dust, old wood, stale hops, and danger. My mother ruined that version for me. "It was damp," she said once. "The roof leaked, the benches had termites, and your grandfather kept frightening away the lunch crowd by storing blessed crossbow bolts behind the bar." Still, from that damp pub, the Institute grew. My grandfather's skill in law and teaching earned him a role with Jade, Raquel, and Themis. My grandmother's skill in medicine made her one of the few sane doctors in Swamp City, which was not so much an insult to the other doctors as an honest census. Swamp City attracted extremes, visionaries and frauds, saints and butchers, and people who looked at marshland and thought, "Here is a place where no one will ask too many questions." My grandmother asked questions constantly. She asked them with a scalpel in her hand. Eventually, glory and gold earned my family the Empress's favor, and the Institute received an actual campus in Haven. Red brick, iron balconies, warded lecture halls, dormitories, libraries, surgical theaters, armories. Beneath it all, the lodge itself, the hidden heart of the Helsing Institute. By the time I was born, the Institute provided nearly everything: health insurance, life insurance, children's education, funeral right, equipment stipends, disability pensions, and, to my grandfather's everlasting pride, subsidized nail salon visits for hunters. "A clean hand shows discipline," he used to say. My grandmother would snort. "A clean hand shows you have not been elbow deep in a ghoul today." They loved each other very much. They argued constantly. My mother fell in love with my father in that rented pub. She had opinions on different translations of Pliny the Elder and attended the cinema each week with a notebook in her purse because she liked to list historical inaccuracies. My father was the barback. He was not allowed to handle the cash register because coin values slipped away from him, but he could glance at a market stall and know which grocer had the best tomatoes, which fishmonger had watered the scales, and which butcher had dressed yesterday's meat to look fresh. They made no sense together, which is often what love looks like from the outside. My Uncle Arthur found his love for teaching in that pub too. By the time I knew him, he was Professor Arthur Helsing, named Justice. To everyone else, he was a hunter, a scholar, a mediator, a man who had survived Tartessos and spoke with the Baron. To me, he was Uncle Arthur, who smelled of aftershave, vanilla, and sage, and who could make a lecture hall laugh so hard the walls seemed to loosen. I grew up inside the Institute more than anywhere else. From the time I was 4, I was always in some kind of school. Daycare in the mornings, reading rooms in the afternoons, my uncle's lectures when no one noticed me slipping inside, my grandmother's surgical theater when she did notice me, and decided curiosity was better than boredom. That surgical theater remains one of the first places I remember wanting power. It was tiered, white-tiled, and always too cold. The air smelled of antiseptic, boiled linen, silver instruments, and old blood hidden beneath bleach. Students sat in the upper seats with notebooks balanced on their knees, whispering until my grandmother entered. Then they stopped. She never had to ask. That was what impressed me. My grandmother could stand below them in a surgical mask, gloved hands already bloody, and project her voice to the back row while removing a rotten appendix. She could explain infection, correct a student's posture, demand suction, and identify a lazy suture, and call out someone falling asleep without ever raising her voice. Everyone listened. Everyone. I was a child who fought to be heard among other children in daycare. I knew what it was to speak and be swallowed by louder voices. I knew what it was to wave my hand until my shoulder hurt and still be overlooked. So the fantasy was not Jason the Argonaut, John the Conqueror, or Sun Wukong. Not really. The fantasy was my grandmother saying, "Pass me the curved forceps," and 6 adults moving at once. The fantasy was Uncle Arthur standing before hundreds of people who would have stepped around me in a corridor without seeing me, while he spoke about hunting puka, werewolves, Samedi sufferers, and his dealings with the Baron in Tartessos. They listened to him. That was the miracle. Not monsters. Attention. In my own classes, I was average. Not terrible, not exceptional. Average is a particular cruelty when you come from famous people. No one says it cruelly. That almost makes it worse. Teachers smiled and told me I was developing well. My parents said I would find my strengths. My grandparents said I would be a great part of the Hunters Guild no matter what path I chose. I believed them. Mostly. But there was always a small voice in the back of my mind. You could be better. It whispered during examinations, sparring drills, lore recitations, and archery practice, when my arrows struck the outer rings instead of the center. You could be the best. Wanting greatness does not produce it. That was a lesson I refused to learn until it hurt someone. I did not go on my first hunt until I was 15. And even then, it was not supposed to be a proper hunt. I would shadow Uncle Arthur while he mediated a rite of death. If something untoward happened, we were supposed to interfere. Otherwise, we would stand there with weapons, documents, and authority, acting as observers. I did not count it as a hunt. A hunt had movement, danger, teeth in the dark, a thing to track, corner, name, and end. This was legal observation, a bare step toward becoming a hunter, especially when every history I had ever read claimed hunter journeymen began younger than I was. The old stories were full of 12-year-olds facing revenants in graveyards, and 14-year-olds striking bargains with river spirits while their elders watched proudly from the bank. I was 15, and still being told where to stand. I would not have known that this was not a small step. It was a leap, and I was about to land badly. You will not need your pistol, Uncle Arthur said, but you will have one. Yes, I muttered. We were driving out toward the Blackwood estate, and I was pretending not to be nervous by staring out the window. Swamp City thinned around us. Brick buildings gave way to low houses on stilts, then causeways, reeds, dark water, and long grass flashing silver in the dusk. The truck smelled of leather, gun oil, Arthur's aftershave, and the paper bag of spiced nuts he had bought from a street vendor and then forgotten to eat. My pistol pressed cold and heavy against my side beneath my overcoat. I could feel it every time the truck bounced over a seam in the road. Arthur glanced at me before turning his head. Eat one before you faint from pretending you aren't scared. I'm not scared. Then eat one before I faint from watching you pretend. He handed me the bag. I took 3 because I was offended and hungry. The nuts were warm, oily, and sharp with pepper. The spice stuck between my teeth. I chewed too fast and nearly coughed. Arthur smiled. It was not a big smile, not sentimental. He was not that kind of man. But it loosened something in me. Remember, he said, other than introducing yourself by name, you will not speak to the residents unless they ask you a direct question. I know. The JRT representative will be present to record everything that occurs. Do not distract him. Do not distract me. Do not distract the participants. I heard you the first time. Arthur chuckled. He was graying at the temples by then, and his belly had begun to show even beneath the layered clothes he wore on institute business. In lecture halls, he dressed like an educator. Waistcoat, rolled sleeves, ink on his fingers, on a hunt, even a hunt that was not supposed to be a hunt. He wore a long trench coat that concealed pockets, charms, blades, and a silver wadjet hanging beneath the collar. I wore a wadjet too. Mine felt too large against my sternum. The charm was shaped like an eye, polished silver and warded against threats both occult and physical. Arthur said it was more effective than the armor used in Europa's trenches. I believed him, but belief did not stop me from touching it every few minutes to make sure it was still there. "Well, smartass," he said, "if you're so well prepared, tell me what a rite of death is." I straightened. The Blackwood estate was still distant then, visible only as a dark interruption against the reddening sky. "Some vampires," I began, "specifically those of the Styrian, Wallachian, and Hibernian lines, do not reproduce sexually, nor are they created through ritual, transgression, or curse. They reproduce by drinking the blood of a normal typicam," Arthur corrected. "Typicam human," I said, irritated, "and then sharing their blood with the typicam. This allows their abilities, knowledge, and bloodline to spread to the new vampire, known as a neonate. The older vampire is the sire." Continue. "The practice is only allowed in the Empire of the Seven Cities under certain conditions. The typicam must be irreversibly terminal in some way. Illness, cancer, old age, severe injury, or something similar. They must renounce all previous claims to their former life. Fortune, land, deals, glory, rank, familial inheritances, marriage contracts, and so on. For all legal purposes, the old person dies and a new person begins." Arthur nodded. Outside, the sky had turned the color of bruised peaches. "The typicam may change their mind or refuse up until the moment of the bite," I continued, "which must occur at a pre-decided time and place, in this case 1 hour after sunset at the Blackwood estate in Haven. And witnesses? The rite must be witnessed by 2 independent observers on the grounds, a legal representative for the typicam, and a hunter trained in vampire dealings. If the typicam refuses or changes their mind, the hunter's role is to keep the vampire from harming them, even if that means the destruction of the vampire." I said the last sentence with more confidence than I felt. Arthur was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You forgot one step." I turned from the window. "What did I forget?" "We try to stop the vampire without force if possible." "Well, yes," I said. "That's implied." "It is not." His voice remained calm, but something in it flattened. "That is why we remind ourselves, and each other." The truck hummed over the causeway. Marsh water glimmered on both sides of us. "Death cannot be undone," Arthur said. At 15, I thought I understood that. At 15, I thought most things were either threats or victims. I did not yet understand how often the world asks you to stand in the room and allow something terrible, because the alternative is worse. The Blackwood estate appeared fully as the sun sank behind us. Its iron gates were at least 5 meters tall and joined to a fence threaded with warding sigils and old family crests. Moss clung to the stone pillars. The iron bars were black, glossy, and wet-looking, even in dry air. As the truck approached, the gates opened slowly inward. I remember thinking they looked like a mouth, not because they had teeth, because they were patient. Arthur parked before the house. The estate itself was old, but well-maintained. Built in the pre-Marsh style, high windows, deep porches, dark wood, and stone steps wide enough for formal arrivals. The Blackwoods had many estates and even more connections, which made this one perfect neutral ground for a rite of death. Neutral ground always looks peaceful until you know why it needs to be neutral. When we stepped out of the truck, the air wrapped around me, thick and damp. Crickets had begun their evening pulse in the grass. Somewhere in the darkening trees, a night bird cried once and went silent. My collar stuck to my neck. My fingers smelled faintly of brass from touching the truck door handle. Inside, the house was much cooler. Too cool. The first thing I noticed was how much had been closed off. Every interior door from the entry room had been shut and locked. The curtains were drawn. Most of the furniture had been removed, leaving only a couch, 3 folding chairs, and a low table holding a pitcher of water no one would drink. The emptiness made the room feel staged, not like a home, like a place waiting to be used. One folding chair was already occupied by a small, mouse-nervous man in a gray suit. He had a narrow face, a narrow notebook, and a pen he kept clicking with his thumb until Arthur looked at him. Then he stopped. He did not introduce himself. He did not need to. The legal representative. He glanced at us, wrote something down, and returned his attention to the notebook as if eye contact might make him responsible for something. That left 2 chairs. I had just begun to sit when a voice hissed behind us. "Welcome to the Blackwood Estate." Arthur turned first. I turned half a second later. That was the first time I saw the Countess. I knew that once she was the most powerful vampire in the Styrian line, but the Great War didn't just displace my grandparents. The Styrian Coven allied with the tyrant and overthrew the exoteric human government of Styria, now acting as the tyrant's vavassoirs. Once the Countess was the leader of the Styrian vampires who opposed the tyrant. Now she was the last one who didn't swear allegiance to him. Now trying to rebuild a coven on a completely different continent, no longer making the rules and forced to obey them. At first glance, she could have walked down any wealthy street in Swamp City without comment. White blouse, red jacket, black pencil skirt, red heels, black hair threaded with gray and pinned into a bun. A steel wire headband rested above her forehead, simple enough to be fashion, and sharp enough to suggest a crown. Then the details arrived. She did not breathe. Her chest did not rise or fall. Her mouth and nose sat in a stillness so complete that it made the room around her seem theatrical by comparison. She had no scent I could identify, no perfume, no sweat, no skin warmth. Standing near her was like standing near a marble statue taken from a cellar. Her face had lines around her eyes and mouth, giving the impression of a woman in her 30s. But this close, I could see they were not true lines. They were drawn. Carefully. Practiced. A little too symmetrical. Her lips were thin and pale. When she smiled, her fangs showed briefly behind them. Not exaggerated, not monstrous, just clearly made for piercing. Her eyes were worse. They were black all the way through. Not dark brown, not shadowed, black. Like shark eyes, like wet ink, something that could reflect light, but not return it. If thoughts lived behind them, I could not see the door. "I am Countess Mircalla Karnstein, named Carmilla, sire of the exiled Styrian Coven," she said. She extended her hand to Arthur. Arthur shook it without hesitation. "I am Professor Arthur Helsing, named Justice, observer of both the Hunters Guild and the Helsing Institute." Carmilla released him and turned to me. Her hand remained extended, waiting. She had all the patience of a snake under warm glass. It took me only a second to hesitate, but that second stretched long enough for my body to betray me. My mouth sounded too loud. My palms went damp. My heart struck hard against the silver eye beneath my coat. I reached out. Her fingers were cold. Not cool, cold. Like ice wrapped in skin. There were no fingerprints, no ridges, no human texture. Just smooth, impossible flesh. The moment I touched her, the heat of my hand condensed against her fingers. Moisture beaded between us. For one horrible instant, it felt as if she were melting. I am apprentice Rebekah Seward, I said, forcing the words steady. I'm shadowing Arthur as an observer. I withdrew my hand too quickly and wiped it against my trousers before I could stop myself. Carmilla noticed. Of course she noticed. Her smile did not change. That made it worse. Then mercifully, she seemed bored with me. The conversation that followed was dull in the way important adult conversations often are. Necessary words arranged carefully around dangerous things. Arthur reviewed the agreed time. The legal representative confirmed the documents. Carmilla corrected one clause concerning neonate inheritance rights in a voice so smooth it made the lawyer sweat. I understood less than I pretended. Mostly, I watched the closed doors. Mostly, I thought about the pistol at my side. I had fired it before, of course. At the training range, at paper silhouettes, clay discs, once at a preserved revenant skull under supervision. Never at anything living, or animate, or looking back. Then Laura was brought in. She came through one of the locked doors with the help of a nurse who stopped at the threshold. The nurse offered her arm. Laura shook her head. It was a tiny movement, barely more than a tremor, but everyone in the room obeyed it. That was the first thing I should have noticed. She wanted to cross the room herself. Laura wore pale blue pajamas patterned with little moons, faded from too many washings. Pajamas that were exactly the same kind that I had. A little more faded, but for one horrible moment, I thought that she was wearing my clothes. The fabric hung from her shoulders as if there were not enough of her left to hold it properly. Her brown hair was thin from illness and matted damply against her temples. She smelled faintly of fever, clean cotton, and the sour chemical trace of medicine sweating through skin. She was young. That startled me. I knew she was a young adult. I had read it in the file. But knowing a fact and watching it take 3 steps into a room are different things. Every step hurt her. I could see it in the way her jaw tightened, in the way her fingers curled against the wall, in the way each breath had to be gathered before it could be spent. The room changed as she entered. The lawyer stopped clicking his pen. Arthur's posture straightened. Carmilla, who had seemed carved from cold stone moments ago, softened in a way that made her look almost human. Almost. Laura reached the couch and lowered herself onto it with a sound that was not quite a groan. More like surrender, escaping through clenched teeth. Sweat shone above her lip, and her hands trembled in her lap. Carmilla knelt beside her. The movement was smooth, silent, too graceful to be comforting. She took Laura's hand between both of hers. Laura flinched at the cold. Then she smiled. That was the second thing I should have noticed. Not a happy smile, not peaceful, nothing so simple. It was the exhausted smile of someone seeing the person they had been waiting for. Carmilla brushed her thumb over Laura's knuckles. "You may still refuse," she said. Her voice was low and dry, like silk dragged over stone. Laura swallowed. The sound clicked in her throat. "No," she whispered. "I'm ready." Her voice was weak, but not uncertain. Carmilla lowered her head for a moment. Not a bow exactly. Something older than that. "I will be careful," she said. Laura gave a faint laugh that broke halfway into a cough. "You always say that, like I have a better option." "You do." "No," Laura said, and her eyes moved briefly toward Arthur, toward the lawyer, toward me. "I really don't." Then she looked back at Carmilla. "But I chose this one." I heard the words. I did. But I was 15, and the room smelled like sickness, old wood, and something too close to death. I could feel the pistol against my side. I could feel the silver wadjet beneath my coat pressing its cold eye into my sternum. I could feel every story I had ever been told arranging itself inside my head. Vampire, human, hunter, rescue. The agreement was for 1 hour after sunset. So we waited. The clock on the mantel ticked with obscene patience. Laura breathed. The lawyer wrote something in his notebook, pen scratching softly over paper. Carmilla did not breathe at all. That was the worst of it. Laura's body was fighting for every mouthful of air, and beside her, Carmilla sat perfectly still, chest unmoving, black eyes fixed on Laura's face. Tick, breath, scratch. Tick, breath, scratch. The sealed house held the sounds close. Outside, the marsh pressed against the walls. I could smell it even through the closed windows, dark water, mud, reeds, the green rot of summer things dying slowly. Inside, the air was too cool. My fingers had gone damp around the arms of the chair. Laura's breathing worsened as the minutes passed. Each inhale dragged. Each exhale sounded thinner. No one moved. No one helped. That was what I saw. Not the legal documents, not the consent, not the fact that Laura had chosen this room, this hour, this death. I saw adults watching a dying woman struggle to breathe. I saw a vampire holding her hand. I saw my uncle doing nothing. Then the clock ticked again. No louder than before, but Arthur glanced at the mantel. The lawyer stopped writing. Carmilla leaned forward. Laura closed her eyes. The bite was not dramatic. That made it worse. Carmilla did not snarl, did not lunge, did not become some storybook thing. Her fangs entered Laura's wrists with the precision of a needle finding a vein. Laura gasped. The sound was soft. Too soft. My fingers tightened on the chair. Carmilla drank. Laura's head rolled slightly toward me. Her eyes opened. They found mine. They did not know what she saw when she looked at me. Maybe nothing. Maybe only a girl sitting where a hunter should have been. Maybe she did not see me at all. But I saw pleading. I saw terror. I saw a person too weak to say stop. My heart kicked hard again against the silver eye beneath my coat. "Uncle," I whispered. Arthur did not look at me. "Everything is all right." It did not look all right. Laura's eyes were dimming. Her mouth parted around breaths that barely came. Carmilla's pale hands held her wrists with terrible tenderness. The lawyer watched the clock. Arthur watched Carmilla. And suddenly I understood myself as the only person in the room still willing to act. That was the lie. It felt like truth. My hand moved to the pistol. The grip was cold, then warm, then slick. I did not think, I am drawing my weapon. I thought, finally someone needed me. Finally there was something only I could do. The pistol came free of the holster. Carmilla's back was turned. I aimed for her heart. Arthur saw me. His eyes widened. My finger tightened. His hand closed around my wrist. I had never felt my uncle's strength before. Not really. Not in lectures, not in training, not when he corrected my stance with 2 fingers and a joke. This was different. His grip crushed the bones of my wrist together. Pain flashed white up my arm. He wrenched the pistol toward the ceiling as the trigger broke. The gunshot split the room open. Sound disappeared into brightness. Wood burst above us. Plaster dust rained down in a dry, choking cloud. Something hot stung my cheek. The smell of gunpowder filled my nose and mouth, bitter and metallic, followed by the chalky taste of ceiling dust on my tongue. The lawyer shouted and fell backward against his chair. Laura did not move. That was the worst part. Even after the gunshot, even after the room exploded above her, Laura did not move. Carmilla turned her head. Only her head. Blood shone on her teeth, her black eyes fixed on me, and for one moment I understood how small a body could be. Arthur twisted my wrist harder. My fingers opened. My pistol dropped into his other hand. With one practiced motion, he made it vanish beneath his coat. "She made a mistake," Arthur said. His voice was calm. Too calm. "She's 15. She made a mistake. Please continue." Carmilla stared at him, then at me. The hunger in her face did not look like anger. Anger would have been more human. This was older and simpler. A cold, immediate interest. For one suspended second, I felt her attention move over my throat, my pulse, the wet heat of my fear. Arthur did not step back. "She will die if you do not finish," he said. That changed her. Not much, but enough. Something like fear crossed Carmilla's face. Poorly made, badly remembered, an expression copied from humans and worn only because Laura needed it. Then Carmilla turned back. She bit into her own hand. Her blood welled dark and thick between her fingers. She pressed it to Laura's mouth. "Drink," she whispered. Laura's lips moved. Carmilla squeezed blood onto her tongue. Laura's breathing weakened, then weakened again, then stopped. The room held still. I thought I watched her die. Then Laura's eyes opened. Black. Not Carmilla's black. Not yet. New black. The kind of dark that has just learned how to be empty. She did not breathe, but she was not gone. I knew it with the same terrible certainty with which I had known, moments earlier, that she needed saving. That was when the first certainty cracked, then the second, then all of them. Every eye in the room turned toward me. The lawyer's face was pale with fury. Carmilla's expression had gone smooth again. Arthur looked at me as if I had become a stranger in the time it took a bullet to miss. My wrist throbbed where he had twisted it. Plaster dust clung to my eyelashes. Gunpowder coated the back of my throat. My fingers still held the shape of the pistol, but the pistol was gone. I opened my mouth, maybe to say, "She looked scared." Maybe to say, "I thought she was asking me." Maybe to say, "Aren't we hunters?" Arthur raised one hand. I stopped. That was the first time I understood how disappointment could enter the body. Not like a wound, like cold water. It filled the spaces where certainty had been. "Rebekah," he said, "go wait outside. Uncle Arthur—" He turned fully toward me. I shut my mouth. His eyes were not angry. That would have been easier. They were tired. "We will discuss this later," he said. "With your parents." My face burned so hot I thought the plaster dust on my cheeks might turn to paste. My eyes stung, but I refused to cry. Crying would make me younger, smaller, more exactly what I had just proven myself to be. The lawyer looked away as if I were embarrassing to witness. Carmilla had already returned to Laura. Arthur glanced at me once more, then shook his head. Small, devastating. I walked to the door alone. Each step sounded too loud. The handle was cold beneath my palm. I looked back once. No one asked me to stay. Outside, night had settled over the Blackwood estate. The door closed behind me with a weight that traveled through the porch, boards, and into my feet. I stood there with plaster dust in my hair, gunpowder on my tongue, and my wrist aching in the shape of my uncle's hand. The marsh breathed around me. Crickets pulsed in the wet grass. Mosquitoes whined near my ears. Somewhere beyond the trees, water moved beneath the reeds with a slow, secret sound. Inside, voices resumed. Low, adult, controlled. The rite continued without me. I stood outside with my empty holster, my aching wrist, and the first unbearable knowledge of my life. Wanting to save someone had not made me a hunter.